everyone. Welcome to Risk Roundup. Category theory has become a key driver for modern mathematics, theoretical computer science, and is beginning to be applied to mathematical physics. As it becomes the language of mathematics for the formulation of the laws of physics, there is a broader hope that it will help us on our journey towards understanding the origin of our universe and our place within it. From helping us understand how the patterns of innovation arise to how the patterns of destruction emerge, category theory has the potential to be a powerful language of conceptual framework that would help us see the common components of a family of structures of any given kind and how constructive and destructive structures are interrelated and integrated. To discuss the promise of category theory further, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Dr. John Baez to Risk Roundup. Professor Baez is an American mathematical physicist and a professor of mathematics at the University of California, Riverside. He is very well known for his work on spin forms in loop quantum gravity and is now focused on applications of category theory to network systems, and he is based in the United States. Welcome, Professor John. We are very honored to have you on Risk Roundup.
Hello, thank you.
Wonderful, Professor John. So it is said that the universe is made of mathematics, and math is fundamentally about rules and pattern, it seems. So as we explore science and math further for uncovering and documenting rules and patterns that occur in human ecosystem, man-made as well as natural, as we see in the contested commons of cyberspace, geospace, aquaspace, and space, it seems mathematics takes the center stage. How do you see mathematical laws governing our human ecosystem if we talk about the contested commons, as in like cyberspace, geospace, aquaspace, and space as we are, moving forward?
Well, I think the laws involving humans are just beginning to be understood because they're much more complex than the laws involving elementary particles. People often think of particle physics as a very sophisticated, complicated science. And if you haven't studied it, it must seem very complicated. But the reason why physicists study it is because it's actually simpler than anything else. We're trying to get at the simplest underlying laws of the universe there. But when you try to apply those directly to larger, more complex systems like cells or people or ecosystems, it doesn't really work practically to reduce those complex systems down to their component atoms and do calculations about atoms to figure out what those bigger systems are going to do. So these more high-level systems, if we're going to understand them mathematically, we have to find laws that govern them at their own level, that is, just on their own terms. And that's what people are trying to do, and it's really an open question how far we'll get at that. There's no guarantee that it's going to be successful past a certain point. But to do it, we need to use all the mathematics we have. That's pretty clear.
Yes, no, obviously, the math can help us a lot, in making it simpler to understand why things are the way they are and what are the relationships. And also, yes, you are right. I mean, there are limitations. We won't be able to use it in changing anything or, creating certain products or anything, but it will help us understand at the fundamental level what those relationships are and, how do we go forward? So as we have understood in science and engineering over the years, we have relied on modeling the world around us, the human world, as we understand now, as more or less interrelated processes. Now, there are systems which have everything has states, and they all undergo interrelated complex processes which alter them somehow, everything that we see around us. So it seems processes are universal, but we don't look at our human ecosystem in the form of processes. Do you think that we should be looking at everything in our human ecosystem in the form of processes to understand it in a more fundamental way, in a more simpler way?
Yes, I think so. I think category theory is really the mathematics of processes. described in a very abstract way so that it is potentially applicable to all different kinds of processes, and yet an elaborate enough language so that we can actually say something interesting about many different kinds of processes, so that it's not just a vacuous business that doesn't get anywhere. So I think that that's the way to try to go. I think that well, I've been studying chemistry, and I'd like to work up toward biology, and I think those are prerequisites for understanding humans, and those are prerequisites for understanding politics, and then the globe at large. And it gets more complicated at each level, obviously, but it's definitely worth pursuing.
Yes, absolutely. It is definitely worth pursuing. And if we look at it, it's not just, humans, it's man, machines, matter, and Mother Nature. Everything is, interrelated, interconnected. So, yes, we do need to have the fundamentals of understanding of biology, science, and, physics and math to be able to understand how all these are interrelated, especially as we advance towards, AI and, get the artificial intelligence in a broad term that everybody says, the learning system. So it is very important to understand at the fundamental level. So as we begin to explore not only the human ecosystem, but the universe beyond the spaces that we know, at least for now: cyberspace, aquaspace, geospace, space. These are the spaces currently we know. There may be, many more spaces emerging that we don't know yet, but it is all about uncovering and documenting the rules and patterns that occur in nature, right? I mean, that's not just nature, but the man, machine, matter, and, Mother Nature. So do you think that category theory will be able to provide us a structural framework for mathematics and be the language for consciousness, not for the entire universe, man, machine, matter, and Mother Nature? Do you think that it has that kind of potential?
Well, all I know for sure is that if we don't use category theory, we're going to be stuck, because category theory has emerged as the right framework for thinking about mathematics in general. There are many different branches of mathematics. People tend to focus on one branch or another. But one great thing about category theory is that it lets you see these branches connecting together and helps use several branches at once. That's why it was invented in the first place. People were studying topology, which is a kind of special branch of geometry, and they were wanting to use algebra to study it. And then they eventually realized that algebra and topology are connected in very precise ways that let you solve a problem in topology using algebra. And then later they learned you could turn it around and solve problems in algebra using topology. And the category theory is what provides the kind of bridge between the two mathematical subjects to make progress on that.
Yes.
And so by now, everyone in those fields is quite convinced that category theory is an essential part of making progress. So I'm generally optimistic that category theory is the right language for bridging different ways of thinking. I don't know if that's all we need. We quite possibly need to develop whole new kinds of mathematics to make progress on things involving people or consciousness. If you remember, Newton had to invent calculus to study the problem of why the planets move the way they did. And it could easily be that we need brand new forms of mathematics to make real progress in the new understanding more complex systems. But I know that category theory will play some role in that.
Perhaps because I mean, if the point that you just made, that it's a bridge between two different paths, and if we look at humans right now, everybody, we all come from different culture, different nationality, different race, religion, and there is if we look at cause and effect and how we look at things, any event happening, everyone reacts in a different way. So there are even though the event is the same, but everybody perceives it in a different way. So the reality, forms in a human mind. Every human being is entirely different than what the reality is outside, in the real world. So how people, everyone perceives any event happening in the world is very, very different than, what the reality is. So there is definitely a need to understand why everyone thinks in a different way, why everyone perceives any kind of event happening in an entirely different way. So it's not even about any event happening. A lot of people just have already formed the opinion about it, or already know what they want to do, irrespective of what the reality around them is. So it is a very complex, and I even if we can solve something like that, then I think it would be very, very useful, to as we go forward. Now, the patterns we see these days, from natural disasters to man-made disasters. If we talk about cyberspace, and in the coming years we'll talk about the smart dust, what kind of problems it could create, nano dust, and the kind of challenges that are coming our way. So man-made and natural disasters both are, in the if you look at all the contested commons, everything is going up. And I read one of your papers where you say that if you see, all these charts are shooting up. And I was thinking about that statement that you made in the article, and I was thinking more about how in all our contested commons, if you see, a lot of innovations are happening. We have a technological tsunami, but at the same time we also have a democratization of destruction. And all those, it's as we see, even just in cyberspace, we have a whole industry of destruction now, and it's the way we are going forward. At the same time, we also are going forward in how to destroy each other. And if you look at the human history, so it's not like technological progress is happening for the first time. It has happened several times before, and humans have many different times have almost destroyed everyone around them. So as we see the patterns today, not only the political patterns, but the innovation patterns and the democratization of destruction patterns and all that, what do you think the patterns are telling us? What exactly is going on? What really is going on from your assessment, as you look at the category theory, and as you analyze all these every day? What do you think the patterns are telling us, where we are going, and whether we are going to destroy each other in the coming years?
Well, I think one thing that we're doing, of course, is we build technology because we're able to do it rather than because we think we should do it. It's very hard to resist the lure of new technologies. If there's something that can be done, it seems that someone will do it, and then even if other people don't want to do it, they feel they have to do it to keep up with those who will do it. So technology is sort of running itself to some extent right now. We like to say we can control whether we're using technologies in a wise way or an unwise way, but I'm not so sure we really have much control over it. And part of that is because the whole idea of technology, the whole, like this, the courses that people study when they're becoming engineers or scientists, there's nothing in there about doing things wisely. It's all about how to do things rather than about what to do. And I think that will have to change, or we may sort of start creating changes so rapidly that we can't keep up with them and wind up destroying ourselves by accident. So a bit of slowing down and thinking about what's really going on, I think, is essential.
It is essential, and each of this technology that we are developing, they all have dual use. You can help the humanity progress. And science and progress in science and development is absolutely essential. But at the same time, when we have technologies that are so destructive, also in the dual use, nature of it, and we have democratization of destruction, that becomes a cause of great concern, because then we have no control over how anyone is going to behave, and at what point what they are going to do, whether it's going to be constructive behavior or it's going to be destructive behavior. Because now there was a time that any such dual use technology would require a lot of investment, but now in $1,000 or few $1,000s you can create anything to destroy even the entire world, perhaps. So there are grave security risk emerging, and I hope that somebody is studying this, analyzing this, that what is at the root cause of the destructive behavior, and how can we identify, looking at what is happening in the world, how can we identify where that kind of pattern is emerging, and how we can stop it, because it's all about mapping the risk. And if we are able to map the risk proactively, then we'll be able to save humanity. But it's a very complex challenge and very complex time, and as we evaluate where science need to go from here, or where we humans need to go from here, um, it seems that from what you said and what I have done research so far, is that category theory will help us to understand not only these challenges, but also how the computer science, theoretical computer science, academic computer science, can be applied to mathematical physics. So as category theory evolves further, where do you think its functions will help us apply the real problems facing humanity, other than what you explained about bridging, the two paths? But what applications do you see emerging that would help us, and even if we cannot solve problem, but to understand problem, much more efficiently?
So one thing I've been thinking about is what are called open systems, which are systems that interact with their environment. Almost every system really is an open system, except for perhaps the whole universe. But the kind of mathematics that people have developed for physics mainly studies closed systems, which are systems that whose don't aren't affected by the outside world and don't affect the outside world. So, for example, if you have a solar system with several planets pulling on each other, moving around, you can treat that as a closed system because you don't think about how that solar system is affecting any other stars in the distance, or how those other stars are affecting it. But in any sort of system that we're dealing with here on Earth, it's always very fundamentally an open system. It's all constantly being affected in unpredictable ways by the outside world, and it's also affecting the outside world in unpredictable ways. And we're very behind on developing the mathematics of open systems compared to the mathematics of closed systems. Engineers do study open systems because they have to. That's what any machine is. It's always interacting with its environment. But the really good research on mathematics that started with Newton studying closed systems there hasn't really been a comparable amount of energy studying open systems. And one of the things this means is that, for example, when we build a factory, we spend a lot of energy trying to make the factory as efficient as possible. We have in mind what we're trying to get that factory to do, produce some product given some inputs. But we tend not to think about the fact that the factory will always also produce waste products, and typically those are ignored to a large extent, not completely, but often they're ignored in the optimization of the behavior of the factory. So we very often focus in on a specific system and try to optimize its behavior to make it as good as possible according to some criteria that we come up with. But then we ignore the fact that it will always have side effects on the rest of the world. and think, well, that's something that somebody else can worry about or take care of later. Um, and I think actually category theory is relevant to this because category theory is a good piece of mathematics for studying open systems. But we don't just need the mathematics; we need actually people to adopt a new attitude towards designing systems. That, that to design them well, we really need to always focus on all their interactions with the rest of the world, not just the part that we're sort of deliberately focused on. And that I think is a change in attitude that has to happen. So the classic, of course, is global warming. We say we want electricity. Okay, so we'll burn something to make electricity. We become very efficient at getting as much electricity out as possible. There are whole books on how to do that. But all those books are ignoring the fact that you're also pumping this carbon dioxide out into the air. And now we're belatedly realizing that we can't ignore that.
No, I hear you. I think you made an excellent point because if you look at it from the risk perspective, all these new risks that are emerging are all interconnected and interdependent. So the system that we talk about, the open system, that yes, we have to look at all different variables, all its interconnections and interdependencies, and not just think in silo about what we want to produce. Let's just produce and not worry about anything else. So that a whole new approach and fundamental, thinking needs to change about interconnectedness and interdependencies, that we are all interconnected, and every risk that we just transfer to someone else, we are just making it bigger and bigger risk and more complex if you just transfer it. And the way industries have emerged about just ensuring risk, if you insure, yes, you will be protected, but that doesn't mean the risk is managed. It is just going to get bigger and bigger and more complex. So that approach and new way of thinking, that whatever we do, it has consequences and it has relationships, that needs to be there. And I was reading about the mathematical universe hypothesis, that we live in this relational reality, in the sense that properties of the world around us, it doesn't stem it stems not from the properties of the ultimate building blocks, but from the relations among those building blocks. So when you think about all those relations and interconnectedness and interdependencies, then it seems that the category theory will prove very beneficial to understand those relations. Do you think that it will help us understand those relations and interconnectedness, interdependencies?
Well, that's what I'm sort of betting my career on. I don't know that it's true, but I know that we need something to tackle these problems, and category theory comes the closest so far. I think it's probably just the first step toward understanding a lot of these issues we're talking about here. But it's the math that comes closest to thinking about how every entity exists through its interactions with its environment. And there's a famous theorem in category theory called the Yoneda lemma, which I won't try to explain, but what it amounts to saying is that every object is completely determined by its relations with other objects. So it doesn't have its own essence on its own. What it has, all its properties arise from its interactions with other things. And so the fact that there could be a branch of mathematics that could talk about that in a precise way is quite surprising. It's quite a new thing, historically speaking. And so I think it sheds a little bit of a hopeful light on the direction we could try to go with mathematics to develop mathematics that's relevant for an interconnected world. But I think that a lot of work needs to be done. It's not that category theory is just sitting there full of all the answers that we need. I instead think of it as like a starting point that we might, if we work, try to use to build the kind of mathematics and also the ways of thinking and acting that we need.
Sure. No, I hear you on that, because it is a approach, new way of thinking and new way of looking at a problem. That is what we have at the moment. But how far we can go depends on how many people are able to understand those concepts and how many of them, apply to the real world problems. Because when we look at the nature of innovations happening today, and almost every system is being redefined and redesigned. So as all these innovators and corporations and academicians, as they all are working towards redefining, redesigning of the systems, are they thinking of this category theory? Are they thinking of the interconnectedness, interdependencies, or it is still a very theoretical concept at this point where, it's discussed more only in the universities and academia circle?
Well, it's slowly changing. So certainly category theory has a reputation for being something that only very esoteric mathematicians would ever discuss. But I've been trying to change that, and some other people have been trying to change that. And so there have been a number of conferences and workshops on applied category theory, trying to connect category theory to many other things, from biology to engineering to different aspects of industrial design. And those have happened in the last 2 or 3 years. And I'm quite surprised at how people are beginning to latch on to that idea. So now there are a number of companies who are hiring interns in the summer who are mathematics graduate students to try to work on practical projects with the help of category theory. I have a couple of students who've done that, and I would never have believed that would happen, say 5 or 10 years ago. I mean, I would believe that it would eventually happen, but I didn't think it would happen already. So I guess I'm being contradictory because I said it's going slowly, but I'm actually surprised by in the last 2 or 3 years how it's finally catching on. But I think it's still just the seeds are just beginning to sprout. I think people are trying to use category theory in all sorts of new ways, but it hasn't really yet gone to the point where you can point to a skeptic and say, look, it really works. Here we can show you, this application, and that will convince you even if you are a skeptic. But so we have like optimistic people who are trying it out right now. And so it's a very, very exciting time because maybe in another 5 or 10 years, we'll know if it's really working or not.
Yes, now of course I understand that. Now, for me especially, what I am looking at is having an ability to map the security risk that are emerging from all the contested commons and the category. I was thinking about this, analyzing it, that how can category theory help me to map the risk? I mean, it seems that it will have a great promise in mapping risk, because as we try to map the technology security risk, category theory can give us the fundamental framework for mapping risk, because it's all about interconnected, interdependent risk, and there are a lot of relationships between each of these risks and interconnectedness. So perhaps as we go a little further, I'm no mathematician, but as we go further, and we see the potential of developing applications that can help us map the security risk, I would be delighted to join that effort, because this is something that needs to be done for the future of humanity, because we need to protect ourselves from all these emerging critical security risks that can that can bring existential risk for the future of humanity. So I hope that we develop this further so that we can pay attention. But outside the field of mathematics, application of category theory, we just talked about different applications that are possible, and the fundamentals. But I was reading that the neuroscience and cognitive science can also benefit greatly by the category theory. So do you see the applications of category theory emerging, or there are already applications of category theory for neuroscience and cognitive science?
I don't think people really have to be honest, I don't think people have really made much progress in that area yet. There are people who are talking about it, trying to get somewhere on that, but I don't think they have yet. It's what you need are a group of people who include people who really understand category theory very well and people who really understand the other topic, say neuroscience, very well. And you need these people to sit around and talk to each other for a couple of years, maybe talk once a day or something like that, to keep trying to have ideas. And that's difficult. So I know a woman, Catherine Hess, in Lausanne, Switzerland, who understands category theory and algebraic topology very well, and she's working with a group of neuroscientists to study patterns of neurons in the brain. And she's not mainly using category theory, but other branches of mathematics to do this. But she gave an interesting talk about different attempts to apply category theory to the brain. She gave that talk last year at the Applied Category Theory Conference, which is now an annual conference. And her talk described different attempts, but really did not conclude that any of these attempts were really successful yet. So that doesn't mean it can't be successful, of course, but it just means that there really needs to be this fermentation process with people working for a while. In other areas, it really has started to happen. And so I've been trying to connect category theory to chemistry, for example. And so I had to learn chemistry for a few years and then start talking to chemists who know it much better than me, and mathematical chemists who know enough mathematics that I can talk mathematically and they can understand me. They still don't know category theory, but they know other kinds of mathematics, so I can translate what I'm thinking into other mathematics. And I've been working on that for about 7 years or so. I've been doing lots of other things too, unfortunately, or I would be going faster. And we're beginning to get some interesting connections between category theory and the biochemistry of the cell and how the cell functions as an open system. But in doing that project, I've realized how much work these type of projects are, because you really need to bridge different research communities and get people talking to each other. And it can't happen overnight. If you talk for half an hour, you still don't know what the other person is talking about.
Yeah.
It takes months or years.
Yes, of course, of course. This is an entirely new kind of work that is emerging, and it will take some time. You're right about it. I mean, if somebody, I would love to be part of all these groups, that are working, irrespective of whether it's cell biology. That is of great interest to me. If somebody is interested in looking at the neuroscience, the neural pathways, I would love to, be part of that. And also, more important is if somebody is interested in mapping the security risk, understanding patterns. I would love to do that, because I think the future of humanity depends on that. So I hope that we can work on that, and that something we can make some sense out of, what is going on. But one of the other, field that I was looking into is integrated information theory. And it seems that there is a lot of advances happening. Do you see the category theory related to integrated information theory? I mean, are they both working together, both these approaches, or what do you see? Where are the differences, and where are the bridges in this two different approach?
I'm not sure I know what integrated information theory is. I know about information theory. Can you say what you mean?
Integrated information theory proposes that maximally irreducible conceptual structure is identical to conscious experience, and uh, that there is no principled way to assess the claimed identity. And there was a proposal that we can apply a mathematical formalism, category theory, to assess the proposed identity, and suggest that it was suggested that it's important to consider if there exists a proper translation between the domain of this consciousness, conscious experience, and that of this in MICS, the integrated information theory, maximally reducible conceptual structure. I mean, I haven't found time to look into that at a deeper level, but on the surface this is what I understood. And it is said that there is the proper translation between the domain of conscious experience and that of MICS can happen, and category theory can be part of that. So like I said, I haven't got much chance to study that, but it's probably going to be very beneficial for understanding neuroscientific and computational approaches. So I thought that they both work hand in hand, and then that our general principles and empirical framework will allow us to evaluate this relationship between the consciousness and mathematical structures, and understand the patterns, and even including those of integrated information theory. So that's all pretty much I know at this.
Uh-huh.
I am still studying that, but it seems very interesting that we can use category theory to assess the relationship between to evaluate the relationship between consciousness and integrated information theory. So that seemed to be very interesting to me. So you are not familiar with the
I'm
advanced.
not familiar with. I'm not very familiar with that, and that I myself shy away from working on things connected to consciousness because it feels too difficult for me at the current time. But in terms of, by the way, in terms of security risks or risk management in general, there's a company called StateBox, who I'm very fond of, who is developing communication protocols and uh, ways of doing business on computers, on the internet, in ways that are meant to be safer and smarter than existing methods. And they're using category theory very heavily in their work. And there they have a group of people designing software who really are thinking about category theory all the time while they're trying to create better software. And so that's something that I'm quite optimistic about, in the sense that you have people with the right combination of expertise who are putting a lot of time into into getting something done. And so that's something that I suggest taking a look at sometime.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to, talk to that company, and if you know them personally, if you can make an introduction, that would be great, because that is something I'm really interested in understanding how to minimize the risk. Because at the end of the day, if we don't make an effort to map the security risk, to make sure that we understand what is happening in the world, because not just now, but what is coming our way once the 5G is implemented widely all across nations, and the internet of everything emerging, and the nanotechnology, small nanobots that are self-replicating, could be used for any purpose, that from air,
Mhm.
water, everything, then the nature of the security risks that are emerging coming our way could be very, very almost impossible to manage, unless we understand what is happening, and we can figure out a way to manage that in a timely manner. Otherwise, the future of humanity, I see a lot of existential risk emerging in the coming years if we are not, you know, at the top of managing those security risks. So it would be great, to understand what they are doing and see where they are going to be able to uh, manage this security risk in a
Sure.
timely manner. So, having said that, it seems like there is we can build a future by understanding the category theory. There is a future if we can understand category theory and advance further and apply it in a more meaningful way. Then there is a future that I see there. But having said that, there is still a lot of work that needs to be done, as you just explained, and there are some groups, as you discussed, that are doing some really important work. And I hope that there are many more groups emerges that can see the value of the category theory, because at the end of the day, everyone and everything is interconnected and interdependent. So we have to understand how every one of our action impacts and creates what kind of risk and creates what kind of benefits. And uh, we have to take, like you said, the open systems need more further advancement, and we need to understand that better. But what would you like to tell our global viewers and listeners, especially about your research, your new initiatives, books, or anything you would like to convey them?
Sure. Well, I just came from a conference called Applied Category Theory 2019, which was held in Oxford. And there was also a school associated to that where graduate students could work on projects together. And it was very exciting. There were a lot of people talking about using category theory in a big, wide range of areas. So people at the National Institute of Standards and Technology are trying to, a small group of people there, not everyone there, some group of people there are trying to use category theory to design better smart grids, so power grids that can adapt to changing circumstances, which is what you especially need if you're using wind and solar energy, which is very variable and coming from many sources. There were people from this company, StateBox, who were using ideas from category theory to design something like blockchain, but more secure and better, and not just blockchain, but other kinds of distributed computer systems that allow you to make contracts with other people electronically and have those securely laid down, and also create software that's not as buggy as current software is now. As you know, now every complicated piece of software has so many bugs in it that hackers can figure out ways to make it do things that it wasn't intended to do. We need a more mathematical approach to software design. There were quite a number of other talks. I'm having trouble remembering them all in a list of people trying really innovative new ideas for engineering design using the new mathematical ideas. And there was a conference in this series in 2018, and it was much smaller. This one has grown a lot. And then in 2020, there will be the third of these applied category theory conferences. And it seems likely that it will happen at MIT. My friends are planning it out. I guess I won't say who they are because it's not completely sure that it will happen, but that seems likely to happen. And so I suspect that it will be even more exciting than the previous one. And as word spreads that this is a subject to do research in, there are a lot of young people at these conferences, which makes me very happy because they're the ones who are our future.
Yes.
And so I'm hoping that will. I'm hoping. Well, I'll tell your viewers to keep an eye out if they're really interested in this. Keep an eye out for Applied Category Theory 2020, and that would be something to look into.
Yes, absolutely. And especially those brilliant young minds who have taken this alternative path of destructive, joining the destructive industry and becoming hackers and, developing all kinds of cyber hacking tools, that they can see the consequences of their action, what it could do for the future of humanity. So I hope that they can, understand this and think it from a very different perspective. So thank you so much, John, for
Okay.
participating in Roundup today. We appreciate your thoughtful insight on the promise of category theory, and I'm sure our global viewers and listeners will benefit tremendously from the information you provided today, and we thank you for that.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Wonderful. So, John, the Risk Roundup, a global initiative launched by Risk Group, is a security risk reporting for risk emerging from existing and emerging technologies, technology convergence, and transformation happening across cyberspace, aquaspace, geospace, and space. We at Risk Group believe that risk management, security, and peace, they walk together hand in hand. Though security is related to management of threats and peace to the management of conflict, risk management is related to management of security vulnerabilities as well as management of conflict. And it is not possible to conceive any one of the three without the existence of the other two. All three concepts feed into each other. We believe that the security we build for ourselves is precarious and uncertain until it is secure for everyone across nations. Tradition becomes our security. So, if we build a culture of managing risk effectively, it will lead us to security, and security will lead us to peace. Let's manage the existing and emerging risks together. For more information on the Risk Roundups, to watch the Risk Roundup video audio podcast, please go to riskgroupllc.com and do not forget to subscribe and share. Until next time, I'm Jayashree, host of Risk Roundup, signing off. See you next time. Thank you.